Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the AM Report for HAPS News, the network of now. I'm Alex Mahajer. It is Friday, December 4th, 2020, and this morning I'll be joined by Miranda Yavor. She's a political scientist and a postdoctoral scholar at UCLA. We'll be discussing this investigation to Donald Trump's potential bribery for pardon scandal amidst news that he will be planning on mulling on giving pardons to his two adult children, Ivanka and Donald Trump Jr. We're going to talk about that, as well as this interview with Jake Tapper yesterday, where President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris had their first joint interview and offered up an idea for a 100-day mask proposal for Joe Biden's first 100 days in office. We'll be discussing all of this and more on the AM Report. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Alex Mahajer. If you're watching on the HAPS website or platform or app, you can click the award button and let us know you're enjoying it, and it'll come up right up on top. We'll see. Or leave us a comment on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, Periscope, wherever you're watching, and let us know you're enjoying the program. And we will definitely bat around with you live on air. I don't know if we just had a connection issue or not. Sorry, it looks like we lost you guys. Anyway, welcome to the program this morning. Thanks for joining. And yeah, if you're watching on the HAPS website, app, or platform, leave us click the award button. Let us know you're enjoying it, or leave us a comment on Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, Twitter, Periscope, wherever you're watching, and we'll bat around with you live on air. We'll be joined by Miranda Yavor in just a moment. But first, today's top headlines. The coronavirus has now claimed 1.5 million lives globally, with 10,000 dying each day. The U.S. death toll has now surpassed 176,000 deaths. So, we've got a vaccine that's coming up before the end of the year here for some Americans. Everyone, please stay safe. Donald Trump has expressed on Thursday that he does not support the $908 billion COVID-19 stimulus bill that is the result of a compromise between Senate GOP and House Democrats that has been gaining momentum in recent days. As we know, there has been no new stimulus bill out of Congress. These talks have stalled. And so more news now that Trump may be holding up any hopes at a coronavirus relief package. The White House is being investigated for a bribery for pardon scheme that is looking at a top fundraiser for Donald Trump and a lawyer for his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. This is coming on news that Trump is also mulling pardons for his adult children. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment with Miranda. And in their first joint interview as President and Vice President-elect, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris appeared on Jake Tapper last night to discuss a range of issues, including Biden's proposal for a 100-day mask policy for his first 100 days. Lots of speculation there that it will significantly reduce the spread of the coronavirus while we wait for a vaccine to be distributed for wide American consumption in the United States. So to talk about these issues, please welcome to the program a friend of the broadcast, Miranda Yavor. Miranda, good morning.
Good morning, Alex. How are you doing?
Doing well. Social distancing and existential dread as usual. But happy Friday. Thanks for joining us.
For 2020.
It's 2020. 2020, man. 2020. We've got people chiming in already. Shivani, hello from Brooklyn. Pablo de la Hoya says hello from LA. Hello, Pablo. Daniel Goff is saying hello from Westminster. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Adam Cobb, for the Super Clap Award. And someone is saying I have to be reminded each morning what COVID is. I feel like that's right. Yes, you're right. I know you're just trying to troll me, but why are we not remembering what COVID is? Let's all remind ourselves, maybe on a daily basis. But thanks for your comment anyway. So Miranda, first things first, this news that another commenter, Guy Abernathy, sorry, they're coming in real time. Oh, not you, Biden. Gotcha. Okay, I gotcha. Thank you. Guy Abernathy says he has nothing left to sell. He sold his soul to Satan long ago. And Adam is saying hello from Washington, D.C. So, Miranda, this news that there is now an investigation into the White House for potential bribery for pardon scheme. I mean, is there anything left for this administration to really do to surprise us? And what are your thoughts on this and what Donald Trump may potentially do with his pardon power? And will you also expand a little bit on what his pardon power is for people who might not fully understand?
Yeah, so one thing that is worth emphasizing is that the president's pardon power is not limited by the Constitution. The president has the power to pardon people. There can be abuses of that power, but it does not mean that he does not have the power to do so. Inherent in the office, the Constitution does not lay out limits of it. And so when you have a power that doesn't impose it, that hasn't doesn't have constitutional limits imposed on it, and you have a president who is as lawless as this one, and who is as I mean, I can't think of a word other than just selfish, and greedy. Um, uh, we're going to see abuses of that, and so we know Michael Flynn is a really good example of that abuse of power. So the idea that there would be bribery for pardons, it's very peak Trump administration. One of the things that I found remarkable was that he was lashing out at the Department of Justice for investigating this, and the idea that he would drag Bill Barr, of all people, who has been such a staunch defender of this presidency and this president, it would be a really laughable end to this administration.
Yeah, it's actually just coming days after Bill Barr sort of uh, publicly refuted his boss and said that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud, that there's no evidence that the election outcome would be any different because of any voter fraud that the Department of Justice has seen, which has sort of prompted Donald Trump to start openly suggesting that the DOJ is a part of some sort of conspiracy with Joe Biden and Venezuela to overturn and steal the election from him. Which is just next level. We know that that Bill Barr has been a huge and very loyal supporter of the president throughout since he was first appointed. And speaking of which, there's a little bit of news coming from these lawsuit fronts. Sidney Powell, who is the attorney for Donald Trump, a tangential attorney for Donald Trump. The Trump campaign has sort of distanced themselves from Sidney Powell, but she wrote a brief in a case that's coming up before Georgia, where she seems to be a little confused. This is a legal brief where she says that the votes were taking votes from Joe Biden and flipping them for Mr. Trump. So are you following the lawsuits? And has Sidney Powell lost her mind, because she's out here claiming voter fraud and then also saying that 3.5% of the votes were actually taken away from Mr. Biden and given to Trump? What are your thoughts on these developments?
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, I've pretty much tuned out the lawsuits because the contested states have certified, and we know empirically that there isn't evidence of any widespread voter fraud. But the idea that the challenge that votes were being flipped from Biden to Trump kind of reminds me of the argument that Hillary Clinton was the one who colluded with the Russians so she could lose. It's like, what exactly is this argument here? Because it's really nonsensical. And at the end of the day, it's not grounded in facts. I watched a little bit of the Michigan hearing that really looked like, it made me wonder whether Parks and Rec had downplayed, public hearings, and was a little too subtle, which is saying something. But the fact that this is the cast of characters that they can come up with, and that these are the arguments that they can come up with, just shows how little evidence there actually is. How the fact that there's really no evidence.
There's just no evidence, none that's been presented, and we already knew that he was going to raise these baseless allegations before the election, so it's not a surprise to anyone who's been watching. But speaking of Bill Barr and the DOJ, and this idea of Trump's pardons. So something that I think people need to understand because the question of whether Donald Trump will pardon himself has come up. People are wondering whether he can, whether he can't, and also what might happen if how Donald Trump might find ways to pardon himself. So, can you clarify for our viewers the timeline requirements for a pardon in terms of past crimes versus future crimes, and the president, whether or not he needs to actually be charged with or even investigated for a crime in order to be pardoned for those crimes?
So the president does not need to be charged with or investigated for a crime to be pardoned. No one needs to be charged with a crime or investigated for a crime to be pardoned. We can remember that Richard Nixon got a presidential pardon, and he by Gerald Ford, and he was not convicted. He was not even impeached. He resigned before impeachment, and so there were not. This was not because of legal wrongdoing. This was because of allegations of wrong. I mean, we know what happened with Watergate, but from a legal perspective, there was not a conviction. There was not a formal charge, or not a formal criminal charge or anything like that. So you can accept a pardon without having an investigation, let alone a conviction. One thing that is worth remembering, though, is that pardons only cover federal crimes. And so they're not going to cover crimes that happened, for example, in New York. So it's not going to be a blanket, you're fine from now on. It's going to be, you're fine with respect to crimes or potential crimes that may have been committed within, within federal jurisdiction. And as to whether the president can pardon himself, like I said, the president's pardon power does not have limits imposed on it by the Constitution, but the idea that you can pardon yourself means that you're a judge in your own case, and that is not consistent with the American legal system. So most legal scholars would say, yeah, the Constitution doesn't say specifically that he can't pardon himself, but a reasonable interpretation would mean that he can't.
We've got a couple of really interesting comments. Marcus Lovingood. Hi, Marcus. He's trying to form some sort of revolutionist brand that's actually hurting his party. Look at Georgia. Boycott the Senate vote. Can't make this up. And it's true that it looks like Trump supporters are calling for a boycott calling on Trump's voters to not participate in the Georgia runoff election in January, on January 5th. And a question from Daniel Goff. Can you be pardoned, then be elected to a federal office, Miranda?
Yes, you can. Yeah, there's not a restriction. Federal office requirements are, age and, citizenship and, living in, within that territory potentially, depending on what office you seek. You don't necessarily you need to live in the same state, but not necessarily the same district, for example. So yeah, you can absolutely receive a pardon and run for federal office. You might run into campaign problems because there will be questions about, why did you accept a pardon? Does this imply criminality? Does this imply guilt? But there is not a restriction on that. So he could absolutely be pardoned and then run again in 2024.
I think that's a really good point, Miranda. I think for clemency that's offered for people who have been wrongfully convicted of crimes, that's one thing. But for a person to pardon an unindicted crime, a crime that is not in the purview of the American legal jurisprudence system, or not publicly at least, that there's been no conviction or even an indictment yet, that is definitely implying wrongdoing. It's a de facto admission of guilt, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, There are debates over whether accepting a pardon implies that you're guilty, but I think that there are certainly reasonable interpretations to that effect.
Okay, very good. We've got some more comments. One commenter is saying a pardon is an admission of guilt. Snoo Gadgets, thank you. That's very kind, Snoo Gadgets. It's great to see you here. And thank you for the compliments epilogued. That's very sweet. Thank you, guys. So, Miranda, Joe Biden, President-elect Joe Biden, feels good to say, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, they appeared on Jake Tapper in their first joint interview yesterday. And I want to play a little bit of that interview and get your feedback about it. And in this interview, primarily the big news that came from it is that Joe Biden has talked to Dr. Fauci, asked him to stay on in his administration, and that he will be recommending a 100-day mask policy this first 100 days. Let's check that out.
Speaking of Fauci, have you spoken with him yet? If so, have you asked him to stay on?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Tell me about the conversation. As he said, what more needs to be done from his point of view?
Well, look, my chief of staff has worked with him in the last crisis. He's been talking to him all the time, Ron Klain. I talked to him today. We spoke today at 3 o'clock. My COVID team met with him. I asked him to stay on in the exact same role he's had for the past several presidents. And I asked him to be a chief medical advisor for me as well and be part of the COVID team. And so what has to be done is we have to make it clear to the American people that the vaccine is safe when it occurred, when that is determined. And number two, you have to make sure, as he points out, you don't have to close down the economy like a lot of folks are talking about now. If, in fact, you have clear guidance and you're able to say to businesses, okay, for example, bars and restaurants are going to close, but we're going to provide you the wherewithal to not lose your business like the House had passed. And we're going to be able to reopen. We're going to be able to reopen in time and not to close down for long periods of time. We talked about masking. It is important that we, in fact, the president and the vice president, we set the pattern by wearing masks. But beyond that, where the federal government has authority, I'm going to issue a standing order that in federal buildings you have to be masked, and in transportation, interstate transportation, you must be masked in airplanes and buses, et cetera. And so it's a matter of, and I think my inclination, Jake, is on the first day I'm inaugurated to say I'm going to ask the public for 100 days to mask. Just 100 days to mask. Not forever, 100 days. And I think we'll see a significant reduction if we occur that, if that occurs with vaccinations and masking to drive down the numbers considerably.
So, Miranda, what are your thoughts here? 100 days of masking. Is President-elect Joe Biden taking into account the significant anti-masker sentiment that has really taken root in the United States, almost preposterously so? And do you think that he's onto something with this proposal, something that's long overdue?
So I think it's definitely long overdue. I think this is great. We know that masks help to curb the spread of coronavirus, because they prevent you from spreading as many respiratory droplets. They're not 100% effective, but they do a lot. They do a whole lot. And we know that leadership is important to see at the top, and we haven't had that in a long time. So there's a lot to be said for having a president saying we're going to wear masks for 100 days to slow the spread. Yes, there is an anti-masker sentiment, and so we're not going. Are we going to see 100% compliance with this? No. A lot of it's going to come down to local enforcement. But the notion of having, which is a challenge that we're having with stay-at-home orders and curfews and things like that already, but to be able to see the leadership at the top, because there are people who are saying, well, the president doesn't wear a mask, so why should I? Well, now we're going to say that we can say that the president is wearing a mask and is telling you to wear a mask, and hopefully that will that leadership will translate into action on the ground level.
Miranda, that your thoughts there just kind of almost gave me the giggles, because I thought back to right after Donald Trump was elected in 2016. We had like, I don't know if you remember, but before his inauguration, there were these weird instances happening around the country of Trump supporters yelling sort of racist things at people on the street and then saying like, "This is Trump's America now." Mm-hmm. And I just kind of got the giggles thinking a bunch of liberals driving around with their masks on saying it's Biden's America now. So welcome to Biden's America, mask up, I don't know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll be doing it, and walking out of your conservative family members' Christmas dinners. This is Biden's America now, you goons. All right, so this is Adam. Thank you, very very funny. It's great to hear real science from a president-elect. I'm sure that this policy will be met with widely varying reactions, says Adam Cobb. Thank you for the LOL award, Adam. So, Miranda, with that, we've got just really the really important news is that in Georgia, this weekend, December 7th, is the voter registration deadline for Georgia residents who want to participate in the January 5th runoff election. Early in-person voting there begins December 14th. January 5th is, of course, election day in the state. And we just heard news yesterday that 198,000 Georgians have been wrongfully purged from the voter rolls ahead of the November election, and then now the January 5th election. There's lawsuits now seeking to reinstate those voters. But if they are not able to succeed in obtaining an injunction through the courts, federal courts in Georgia, those voters will need to re-register, and they only have until December 7th this weekend to do that. So I just wanted to chime in and say that. Miranda, what are your plans for the weekend, and what are your thoughts for our viewers as we go into our weekend year?
I will be reminding people to register to vote for the Georgia runoff. So I'll be making calls. To Georgia this weekend. These are elections on which the control of the Senate hinges. And it's not just control of the Senate, it's whether we can pass healthcare reform. It's whether we can confirm good nominees to our cabinet so that we can have the expert leadership that we elected Biden to be able to deliver. So that's what I'll be working on. And I would really encourage anyone who's in Georgia to check their registration status, to make sure that they're registered to vote, to make sure that they've requested their ballot, because every policy that we voted on in November is going to come down to this election.
Very good. And Miranda, where can people find you, support you, and make calls with you to Georgia if they so desire?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Miranda Yaver. Reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Very good. This has been Miranda Yaver, political scientist, postdoctoral scholar at UCLA, and a friend of the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
Miranda. Have a great weekend.
You too.
This has been the AM Report for HAPS News, the network of now. I'm Alex Mahajer. I'm your host. We are live every weekday morning at 7:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Eastern, with all of your quick political news and headlines to get your day started right. If you like this journalism, if you like this content, please consider clicking the award button on the HAPS app or website and let us know you're enjoying it. Or consider subscribing or becoming a sponsor. You can do that at haps.tv/@Alex. And consider buying me a cup of coffee. We will be back Monday morning to discuss all of the news. Thank you so much for joining. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.